The cruelest invitations are the ones disguised as courtesy. Evelyn Carter saw Jason's name on her phone at 6:14 p.m. while standing by the window of her apartment, watching rain slide down the glass in slow silver lines over Manhattan. For a moment, she thought about ignoring it. That would have been the easier choice. But curiosity had always been one of Jason's favorite weaknesses to exploit. So she answered. His voice came warm, polished, almost nostalgic. The kind of voice that used to make promises over takeout containers and midnight coffee. Evelyn, he said, as if saying her name still belonged to him. Long time. She didn't respond right away. Silence had become one of her cleaner habits. I'm hosting an executive gala tomorrow night, he continued. Big company event. Promotion celebration. I thought it might be nice if you came. Nice. The word almost made her laugh. Jason Carter had never confused kindness with strategy. Why? She asked. A beat passed. Then his smile entered his voice. Closure. She should have hung up. Instead, 24 hours later, she stepped out of a black town car beneath the white glow of the Grand Regent Hotel canopy, where valets in tailored uniforms moved with rehearsed precision and guests in silk, cashmere, and custom tuxedos drifted through revolving glass doors like they had nowhere else more important to be. The ballroom was on the 32nd floor. Crystal chandeliers reflected in polished marble. Champagne moved across silver trays. A jazz trio played something expensive and forgettable near the far wall. Evelyn handed over her invitation. The young hostess checked the list, glanced up, and for the smallest fraction of a second, her expression changed. Recognition? Surprise? Evelyn couldn't tell. Then the hostess smiled. Welcome, Miss Carter. Evelyn stepped inside, and the room shifted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough. Conversation softened. A woman near the bar leaned toward her husband and whispered. Someone across the room stared too long before pretending not to. Evelyn felt the weight of recognition spreading outward like ripples in dark water. Jason's old colleagues. Industry wives. Social orbiters. People who remembered her from before. Before Jason's better suits. Before his promotions. Before his carefully edited new life. Then she saw him. Jason stood near the center of the ballroom with one hand around a champagne flute and the other resting lightly against the waist of a blonde woman in ivory satin. Vanessa Holloway. Younger. Immaculate. The kind of woman who looked assembled rather than born. Jason noticed Evelyn at almost the exact same second. Surprise flashed across his face first. Brief. Human. Then came satisfaction. Slow. Deliberate. As though a chess move had landed exactly where he wanted it. He excused himself from his circle and crossed the room. His tuxedo fit better than anything he owned when they were married. His hair was cut sharper. His watch probably cost more than their first car. You came, he said. You invited me. I honestly wasn't sure you would. That must have been difficult for you. His smile widened just enough to acknowledge the hit. Still quick. Still predictable. Vanessa approached with the smooth confidence of someone entering a scene she believed belonged to her. Jason, she said lightly, though her eyes were fixed on Evelyn. Aren't you introducing me? Jason turned with theatrical ease. Of course. He looked back at Evelyn. Vanessa, this is Evelyn. My ex-wife. Not Evelyn. Not someone he once loved. A title. A relic. Vanessa extended her hand. I've heard so much. Evelyn shook it. I doubt that's true. Vanessa laughed politely, unsure whether she'd been complimented or cut. Jason gestured toward the ballroom. Quite a night, huh? Evelyn scanned the room. Apparently. Regional vice president, he said, pretending modesty. Not bad for a guy everyone underestimated. Everyone. An interesting rewrite of history. Congratulations, Evelyn said. Jason studied her face, clearly searching for something. Regret. Jealousy. Damage. Whatever he expected, he didn't find it. You look, he paused. Different. People tend to. Vanessa tipped her head. Jason told me you used to be very supportive of his early career. Used to. That's one way to phrase it, Evelyn said. Jason chuckled. Evelyn was there during the ramen noodle years. Vanessa laughed like that detail had been curated for her entertainment. That's adorable. Evelyn held her champagne glass without drinking. Is that what this is? Jason blinked. What? A nostalgia exhibit? His expression never broke, but something behind it sharpened. Come on. Don't be like that. Tonight's about celebrating growth. Yours? Mine happens to be measurable. Vanessa touched his arm. Jason, the Hendersons wanted to say hi. In a minute. He kept his attention on Evelyn. Actually, I was about to introduce you around. Why? Because, he said, lowering his voice just enough to mimic sincerity. I think people appreciate seeing the full story. There it was. Not closure. Not courtesy. Context. He wanted witnesses. Evelyn looked around the ballroom again. Familiar faces. Curious faces. Predatory faces. The social ecosystem of success always loved an origin story, especially if the discarded first chapter could be displayed in person. You planned this, she said quietly. Jason shrugged. You gave a decade. Might as well see the final product. Vanessa smiled into her glass. That's actually kind of funny. Jason turned toward a nearby group. Ladies and gentlemen, he called, easy and charming, drawing attention with the instinct of a man who enjoyed being watched. Conversations paused. Heads turned. I want you all to meet someone important from my past. Evelyn felt it then, not pain exactly. More like clarity. The kind that arrives when someone finally becomes exactly who you always suspected they were. Jason lifted his glass. This, he said, smiling at the room, is the woman who said I'd never belong in rooms like this. A lie. Clean. Elegant. Instantly believable to anyone who wanted entertainment more than truth. A ripple of polite laughter moved through the crowd. Vanessa smiled wider. Jason looked directly at Evelyn, waiting. Waiting for embarrassment. For anger. For some visible fracture he could enjoy. Evelyn met his gaze. Calmly. And somewhere behind Jason, near the ballroom entrance, several senior executives suddenly straightened at once. Jason held the moment like a man enjoying the sound of his own applause. The laughter around him was not loud, but it was enough. Enough to signal allegiance. Enough to remind Evelyn exactly what kind of room this was. People here did not always reward truth. They rewarded confidence. Jason smiled as if he had delivered something clever instead of cruel. Come on, he said, glancing around at the guests. Do not all look so shocked. Evelyn and I have history. A silver-haired man near the bar chuckled politely. Vanessa tilted her head against Jason's shoulder with effortless ownership. Jason always says his past made him stronger, she said. I guess we should be grateful. More laughter. Soft. Refined. The kind that pretended to be harmless. Evelyn let the silence settle instead of filling it. Jason noticed. He always noticed when she refused to perform the role he assigned her. Nothing to say, he asked. You seem to have prepared enough dialogue for both of us. A few people exchanged looks. Jason smiled, but tighter now. Still sharp. Still rehearsed. Vanessa lifted her glass. I think this is all being misunderstood. Jason just wanted everyone to appreciate how far he has come. Evelyn looked directly at her. Then he should probably talk about his own work. Vanessa's smile froze for half a second. Jason stepped in smoothly, as if rescuing the conversation. You know what? Let us make this easy. Evelyn was there when I had exactly $83 in my checking account. He laughed. Now look at this place. He spread one arm toward the chandeliers, the polished marble, the expensive flowers flown in from somewhere no one in the room could pronounce correctly. That must feel surreal for you. Evelyn took a slow breath. Not as surreal as hearing fiction delivered with confidence. A younger executive near the buffet nearly choked on his drink, trying not to laugh. Jason heard it. His expression cooled. He leaned closer. You always did have trouble celebrating other people. No, Evelyn said quietly. Only revisionist history. Vanessa touched Jason's arm again. Honey, maybe this is not worth it. But her tone suggested the opposite. She was enjoying herself now. The room had become theater, and Evelyn had been cast as the woman left behind. Jason lowered his voice. I offered you closure. No, Evelyn said. You offered yourself an audience. That landed harder than she expected. Jason's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before the smile returned. Interesting. Because from where I stand, you are the one who showed up. Fair point. Superficially. That was Jason's gift. Making manipulation look reasonable from a distance. Evelyn glanced toward the bar, considering whether to leave. She had seen enough. Understood enough. But then something strange happened. The energy in the room shifted again. Not dramatically. Not yet. Just enough that people near the ballroom entrance began turning their heads. A murmur moved across the floor, different from the earlier laughter. Sharper. Respectful. Jason noticed it too, but kept his posture steady. Looks like someone important just arrived, Vanessa whispered. Jason straightened his jacket instinctively. Probably Henderson. But it was not Henderson. Evelyn did not turn immediately. She simply watched Jason's expression as recognition slowly replaced confidence. Not fear. Not yet. Just alertness. The kind ambitious men developed when hierarchy entered the room. A hotel manager appeared near the entrance, suddenly more attentive than before. Several senior executives adjusted their stance. One woman who had barely acknowledged Jason all evening now looked past him entirely. Vanessa frowned. Who was that? Jason did not answer. Evelyn finally turned. Across the ballroom, surrounded not by bodyguards or spectacle but by gravity, stood a tall man in a midnight suit, silver at the temples, composed in the way only truly powerful people seem to be. He was not speaking loudly. He did not need to. People moved differently around him. Space rearranged itself. Jason swallowed. Alexander Morgan, he said under his breath. Vanessa blinked. The Alexander Morgan? Yes. She looked suddenly thrilled. Oh my God. Jason, this is incredible. If he is here tonight, he was not supposed to be here, Jason said, too quickly. Evelyn heard that. Interesting. Jason immediately recovered. Well, things change. He adjusted his cufflinks, posture sharpening, voice warming with professional eagerness. This could actually be perfect. Vanessa smiled brightly. You have to talk to him. Obviously. Jason turned back to Evelyn as though remembering unfinished business. Looks like your timing was excellent after all. You might actually witness something meaningful. Evelyn said nothing. Jason mistook that for defeat. You know, he said, lowering his voice with smug familiarity. This is what real success looks like. Men like Morgan do not just walk into rooms for no reason. Evelyn held his gaze. Are you sure about that? He laughed once. Please. Men like him barely notice people like us. Evelyn almost smiled. Not because he was wrong. Because he sounded so certain. Across the room, Alexander Morgan began walking. Not toward the executive cluster nearest the stage. Not toward the board members waiting by the champagne tower. Straight through the center of the ballroom. And with every step, conversations dissolved. Alexander Morgan did not move like a man seeking attention. That was what made the room pay attention anyway. The most powerful people rarely needed to announce themselves. They simply arrived, and everyone else adjusted. Jason stepped forward instinctively, shoulders squared, expression carefully arranged into professional confidence. Evelyn had seen that face before. The ambitious version. The one that smiled with calculation instead of warmth. Vanessa leaned in close enough for Jason to hear her whisper, "This is your moment." Jason nodded once, already rehearsing whatever version of himself he planned to present. Around them, conversations dissolved into quieter tones. Executives who had spent the evening pretending Jason was the center of gravity were now looking elsewhere. Alexander continued forward at an unhurried pace, acknowledging a board member with the smallest nod, passing a senior vice president without stopping. Jason smoothed the front of his tuxedo. "Stay here," he said to Vanessa, then glanced at Evelyn with a thin smile. "You may as well watch how this is done." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "I have been watching." Jason either missed the meaning or chose to ignore it. He took 2 steps forward, timing his approach to intercept Alexander with what he probably imagined was effortless confidence. But before Jason could speak, Alexander kept walking. Straight past him. Not rudely. Not dramatically. Simply without pause, as though Jason occupied no meaningful position in his immediate priorities. Jason froze for half a second before recovering. The kind of recovery only noticeable to someone looking directly at him. Evelyn noticed. Vanessa noticed too. "Did he not see you?" she whispered. Jason forced a laugh. "Of course he saw me." But the words landed badly. Because Alexander was still walking. Still approaching. Toward them. Toward Evelyn. A strange quiet formed in the surrounding air, the way a room changes before a major announcement. Evelyn held her glass steady. Jason shifted his weight. Vanessa's polished smile had started to look uncertain around the edges. A few guests turned openly now, no longer pretending discretion. Jason stepped sideways, positioning himself back in Alexander's path, ready to introduce himself if necessary. But then something happened that made him stop. Alexander's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough to signal recognition. Real recognition. Directed not at Jason. At Evelyn. Jason looked from Alexander to Evelyn, confusion creeping in beneath his composure. Do you know him? Vanessa asked under her breath. Jason answered first. No, too fast. Too certain. Evelyn said nothing. Alexander stopped exactly 3 feet in front of her. The distance felt deliberate, respectful, her expression unreadable, calm in a way that suddenly made complete sense and no sense at all. Jason glanced between them again, the first cracks of uncertainty widening. Evelyn, he said quietly now. For the first time all night, there was no performance in his voice. Just confusion. Alexander finally spoke. His voice was low, composed, unmistakably certain. I apologize for being delayed. Not to Jason. To Evelyn. Several guests exchanged stunned looks. Jason stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. Delayed? He repeated, barely audible. Evelyn set her untouched champagne glass onto a passing tray without breaking eye contact with Alexander. Vanessa took one involuntary step backward. Jason laughed once, but there was no humor in it. What exactly is happening here? Alexander turned his gaze toward him then. Calm. Controlled. Not hostile. Which somehow made it worse. Jason straightened, trying to reclaim ground that was already disappearing beneath him. Mr. Morgan, I think there has been some misunderstanding. Alexander said nothing immediately. That silence was heavier than interruption. Jason kept talking, because men like Jason often did when nervous. Evelyn and I were just catching up. Old history. Personal matters. Alexander's expression did not change. I see. 2 simple words. Yet Jason visibly deflated beneath them. Evelyn almost pitied him. Almost. Because suddenly the entire evening looked different from where she stood. The invitation. The performance. The laughter. Jason had believed he controlled the narrative because he believed he understood every person in the room. He had never considered the possibility that the woman he invited to humiliate had arrived carrying a story he knew nothing about. Some truths only make sense when you survive them. Jason stood frozen, his confidence draining so subtly that only someone who had once memorized his every expression would have noticed. Evelyn noticed. For years, she had studied the difference between his sincere smile and his strategic one. The slight tightening around his eyes when he was bluffing. The tiny shift in posture when a conversation stopped going his way. She knew all of it. That knowledge used to hurt. Tonight, it felt strangely distant. Jason cleared his throat. Evelyn, he said again, forcing a laugh that sounded thinner this time. You want to explain this? But before she answered, memory arrived the way it sometimes did when a room became too quiet. Not gently. All at once. 10 years earlier, Jason had not looked like this. No custom tuxedo. No executive confidence. No polished voice built for boardrooms and networking dinners. He had been 28, ambitious, exhausted, and convinced the world owed him more than it was giving. They lived in a 600-square-foot apartment in Queens with a radiator that hissed like it held personal grudges and kitchen cabinets that never fully closed. The bathroom sink leaked. The oven worked when it wanted to. Their first winter there, Evelyn used a folded towel to block cold air from slipping beneath the front door. Jason used to call it temporary. A year, he would say, eating microwave pasta at the tiny table by the window. 2 max. Then we level up. Evelyn believed him. Or maybe she believed in effort more than outcomes. She worked customer support for a healthcare software company during the day and picked up freelance editing work at night. Jason studied for his graduate business program, built spreadsheets, attended networking mixers where everyone pretended to be more successful than they were. She ironed his shirts before interviews, helped him rehearse answers, sat on the couch asking mock questions while he paced in socks across worn hardwood floors. Tell me about a time you handled conflict, she would say. He would grin and point at her. Marrying someone this intense. She laughed then. Real laughter. The kind that comes before disappointment teaches restraint. When tuition bills stacked up, Evelyn sold the small diamond bracelet her grandmother had given her at 21. Jason hated that she did it. At least he said he did. I will pay you back, he promised, holding her hand across a diner booth lit by fluorescent lights. Every penny. That is not why I did it. Then why? She smiled. Because one of us has to believe in the future when the other one gets dramatic. Back then, he kissed her forehead and called her his anchor. Funny how certain words age badly. His first real promotion changed things slowly enough to feel reasonable. Better apartment. Better restaurants. Better clothes. Then came better circles. People who laughed differently. Women who spoke in polished confidence and asked Evelyn what she did with the kind of tone that suggested the answer might rank her socially. Jason started correcting her at dinners. Tiny things at first. Actually, that is not how that works. You are simplifying it. Let me explain. She noticed. Of course she noticed. But love has a dangerous habit of translating disrespect into stress. She told herself he was tired. Under pressure. Adjusting. Then came the business trip to Chicago where he forgot to call. Then the networking retreat in Napa where his photos included the same blonde woman twice in the background. Then the subtle changes at home. His phone face down. His affection scheduled. His conversations shorter. The night she finally asked if there was someone else, he looked offended. Not guilty. Offended. Do you hear yourself? He asked. I am working 14-hour days. That is not an answer. Because it is a ridiculous question. 3 months later, divorce papers arrived by courier on a Tuesday afternoon while she was on a lunch break. No dramatic confrontation. No mutual conversation. Just signatures and legal language. When she called him, he sounded almost inconvenienced. It is cleaner this way, he said. Cleaner. As if 10 years together had become clutter. Was any of it real? She asked. Silence. Then, people grow, Evelyn. She almost laughed remembering that now. People grow. What a polished way to describe abandonment. The divorce finalized 8 months later. No children. Few shared assets. One marriage reduced to paperwork and itemized separation. The first year after felt less like heartbreak and more like disorientation. Not because she wanted him back. Because she had built so much of her identity around being part of a future that vanished overnight. She moved into a smaller apartment downtown. Learned how quiet evenings could be when no one expected emotional labor from you. Made coffee for one. Walked to work alone. Cried less than people expected. More than she admitted. Friends invited her out. Some disappeared when she stopped performing recovery in socially acceptable ways. She worked. Slept. Rebuilt. Slowly. One practical decision at a time. New certifications. Consulting contracts. Fewer apologies. Better boundaries. One morning she realized she had gone an entire week without thinking about Jason. It felt less like triumph and more like oxygen. And then, years later, a conference in Boston. A panel discussion on organizational strategy. She had not intended to attend the networking reception afterward. Too loud. Too performative. But a client insisted. She remembered balancing sparkling water in one hand while checking emails with the other when a calm voice beside her said, that panel would have improved dramatically if they had allowed one competent person to answer honestly. She looked up. Alexander Morgan. She recognized him instantly, though not because of magazines or headlines. Because everyone in business knew the name. She assumed he was making conversation with someone behind her. He was not. Excuse me, she asked. You disagreed with 3 of the speakers, he said. Your face made that clear. That is embarrassing. No. Honest. That was the first conversation. Brief. Unexpected. Entirely forgettable, she thought at the time. Yet now, standing in a Manhattan ballroom, while Jason stared at her like a stranger, Evelyn understood something strange about life. The moments that rearrange everything rarely announce themselves when they begin. Evelyn. Jason said again, sharper now, dragging her back into the present. What exactly is going on? She looked at him calmly. The man who once believed her story ended where his success began. And for the first time in years, she realized how little he actually knew. Alexander Morgan had not been what Evelyn expected. Men with that kind of reputation usually entered conversations already convinced they were doing everyone a favor by speaking. Alexander had not. In Boston, after his comment about the panel, he asked her what she would have said differently. Not as performance. Not to test her. He actually listened. That alone made him unusual. The third speaker confused efficiency with intimidation, Evelyn had said. And the second one used 10 minutes to say absolutely nothing. Alexander smiled, not broadly, just enough to register amusement. That is refreshingly specific. You asked. Most people answer strategically when they recognize me. Should I have? Probably. That sounds exhausting. He laughed then. A real laugh, brief and unguarded. That should have been the end of it. One conversation. One conference. One strange encounter with a man whose company valuation appeared regularly in financial headlines. But 3 weeks later, she received an email. Not from an assistant. From Alexander directly. Subject line, a question. Inside, only one sentence. If you were rebuilding a failing internal communication structure from scratch, where would you begin? She stared at it for a full minute before deciding it was either legitimate or an elaborate prank. She replied with a concise answer. He wrote back the next day with follow-up questions. Then another exchange. Then a video call. Then consulting work. Not glamorous. At first. Process audits. Leadership recommendations. Communication frameworks for departments where no one trusted one another. She expected layers of bureaucracy between them. Instead, Alexander remained unexpectedly direct. Efficient. Curious. He never wasted words. He also never treated her like someone who needed to prove she belonged in the room. That difference mattered more than she admitted. The first time she visited Morgan Global headquarters, she wore the most conservative suit she owned and arrived 20 minutes early. The lobby alone looked like the kind of place where mistakes echoed. Glass walls. Quiet confidence. Art that probably cost more than houses. She expected scrutiny. Instead, the receptionist greeted her by name. Mr. Morgan is expecting you. No one had said that to her before with that kind of certainty. During the meeting, a senior executive interrupted her halfway through a recommendation. That sounds idealistic, he said, leaning back like dismissal was a leadership skill. Evelyn had started to retreat into politeness when Alexander cut in. Then perhaps explain why her idealism has more operational logic than your current strategy. Silence followed. Not cruel, just decisive. The executive adjusted instantly. That was the day she understood Alexander's version of power. He did not raise his voice. He rearranged outcomes. Months passed. Work expanded. Her contracts became longer. More visible. Better paid. She moved into a larger apartment. Bought furniture she actually chose instead of inherited. Replaced survival habits with preferences. Somewhere in that transition, she realized she no longer introduced herself through what had happened to her. That was new. One winter evening after a board strategy dinner, Alexander offered her a ride because freezing rain had turned Manhattan into reflective chaos. His driver waited outside while they sat in the back seat moving through traffic at the pace of regret. You rarely talk about your personal life, he said. That is usually because I enjoy keeping my personal life personal. Fair. A pause. Divorce. She turned toward him. Was it that obvious? No. Someone mentioned your previous name in passing. I made an inference. That sounds less intrusive when you say it. One of my more profitable qualities. She laughed despite herself. Then, for reasons she still could not fully explain, she told him. Not everything. Just enough. Marriage. Sacrifice. Collapse. Jason, though not by name. Alexander listened without interruption, looking out at rain streaking across the window as though giving her privacy inside the conversation. When she finished, he said only, he sounds short-sighted. She smiled faintly. That is one word for it. I prefer accurate ones. It was not romance. Not then. The world would have simplified it that way because people often mistrust relationships built on respect. But what existed first was trust. Professional. Gradual. Clean. The kind that forms not through dramatic declarations, but repeated evidence. He remembered details. Followed through. Asked her opinion before making decisions. Introduced her in rooms by expertise, not convenience. That changed something fundamental. One spring afternoon after a meeting ran long, they ended up in his office overlooking the city while sunset turned the glass towers copper. Alexander removed his reading glasses and said, You apologize less now. Is that a complaint? An observation. I am evolving. Good. Then, after a pause, you should have been doing that years earlier. That sounds suspiciously personal. It is. She looked at him carefully. Alexander. Evelyn. Are you always this subtle? Only when I am uncertain whether subtlety is wise. Her heartbeat betrayed her before her expression did. That sounds dangerous. Not particularly. Merely honest. It happened slowly after that. Dinner, though neither called it that at first. Conversations longer than necessary. Shared silences that felt comfortable instead of empty. The relationship did not begin with spectacle. It began with consistency, safety, mutual respect, which made it infinitely more disorienting than chemistry alone ever could have. When he proposed, there were no photographers, no orchestrated luxury performance, just a quiet private terrace, city lights below, and Alexander saying, I have spent enough of my life recognizing value too late. I would rather not repeat the pattern. She said yes, because the answer had become obvious long before the question. They kept the marriage private at first. Strategic reasons. Corporate complications. Timing. Not secrecy born from shame. Secrecy born from practicality. Very few people knew. Which explained Jason's confusion now. Standing in the ballroom, watching his carefully arranged humiliation unravel in real time, Evelyn understood the scale of what he had never imagined. Jason had built an entire narrative where she remained frozen in the role of discarded wife. A woman paused at the point he left her. He had never considered she might continue becoming someone he no longer recognized. Vanessa looked between Evelyn and Alexander like she had stepped into the wrong script. Jason's expression had hardened into something between disbelief and calculation. He was trying to solve the room like it was a negotiation. Alexander remained still, composed, present. And then Jason made the mistake ambitious men often make when uncertainty frightens them. He decided to speak first. Jason stepped forward before uncertainty could fully expose him. Evelyn recognized the instinct immediately. Control the narrative before someone else does. Mr. Morgan, Jason said, recovering his executive smile with impressive speed. This is clearly an unexpected surprise. I had no idea you knew Evelyn. Alexander regarded him with the kind of calm that made most people fill silence with unnecessary words. Jason did exactly that. Small world, I guess. Vanessa laughed too quickly, eager to help normalize a situation she did not understand. Very small, she said brightly. We were just catching up on old memories. Evelyn almost admired the effort. Almost. Alexander's expression did not shift. Were you? It was not a question. Jason straightened. Yes, absolutely. Evelyn and I go way back. The phrasing landed badly the moment it left his mouth. Jason seemed to realize it too late. Alexander glanced briefly toward Evelyn. I gathered that. A few nearby executives pretended not to listen while listening intensely. The social geometry of the room had changed completely now. Earlier, Jason had been performing upward ambition for an admiring audience. Now the audience was recalculating his value in real time. Jason looked at Evelyn, searching for cues. She offered none. I should have mentioned, he said, turning back toward Alexander. Evelyn has always been remarkably resilient. Evelyn nearly smiled at the word choice. Men like Jason loved adjectives that sounded complimentary while avoiding accountability. Vanessa slipped her arm through his. Jason talks about growth all the time, she added. That is kind of what tonight is about. Alexander looked at her politely enough to acknowledge her presence without encouraging continuation. Vanessa immediately fell silent. Jason pressed on. We actually invited Evelyn because it felt right to include people who were part of the journey. Journey. Another elegant lie. Alexander's gaze moved to the half-circle of guests still lingering nearby, then to the untouched champagne glass Evelyn had set aside moments earlier. I see. Jason mistook restraint for acceptance. Exactly. No hard feelings. Ancient history. Evelyn finally spoke. That is an ambitious interpretation. Several people looked away to hide reactions. Jason gave a strained chuckle. Come on. No. Evelyn said calmly. Let us avoid pretending honesty would make anyone uncomfortable at this point. Vanessa stiffened. That feels unnecessary. Does it? Evelyn asked. Jason's smile vanished for a fraction of a second. Evelyn. A warning. Familiar. Once, that tone would have changed her behavior. Not anymore. Alexander said quietly. Is there something relevant I should understand? The question was neutral. That was what made it devastating. Jason answered immediately. Nothing complicated. Evelyn answered at the same time. Quite a bit, actually. Silence. Jason turned toward her, composure cracking around the edges. Really? You invited me here to be publicly humiliated. That is ridiculous. Is it? She tilted her head. Should we ask the audience? A woman near the bar suddenly found her drink fascinating. Jason lowered his voice. Do not do this. You already did. Vanessa stepped in with social precision. I think everyone is being emotional. Evelyn looked at her. You laughed. Vanessa blinked. Excuse me. When he introduced me as entertainment. Vanessa's face colored. That was not what happened. Then your memory and mine are having separate evenings. Jason exhaled sharply. This is getting absurd. Alexander remained still, but something in the room sharpened. Jason sensed it. Mr. Morgan, with respect, this is a personal misunderstanding being exaggerated. Alexander's voice remained even. Then it should be easy to clarify. Jason hesitated. Tiny. Visible. Enough. Evelyn remembered another hesitation years ago. Different room. Different stakes. The night she found a receipt for dinner in Napa for two when Jason had claimed he ate alone. He had paused then too, deciding which version of reality would be most convenient. Same man. Better tailoring. Jason forced a laugh. Look, tonight was meant to celebrate a promotion, not dissect old relationships. Then perhaps you should not have introduced one publicly, Alexander said. Quiet words. Precise impact. Jason actually took a breath before responding. Vanessa looked genuinely alarmed now. Jason, she whispered, maybe we should just move on. But Jason had spent too many years building himself around performance. Retreat in front of witnesses would feel like defeat. I think this is becoming disproportionate, he said, choosing corporate language like armor. No one intended disrespect. Intent is a remarkably flexible defense, Evelyn said. Jason snapped his attention toward her. What exactly do you want? The question came out harsher than intended. Too raw. Too public. Evelyn studied him for a moment. The irony nearly overwhelmed her. For years, she had wanted explanations. Accountability. Truth. Tonight, she wanted none of those things. Nothing from you, she said. That answer landed harder than anger would have. Jason blinked. Because indifference has a way of humiliating people who expected emotional access. Alexander extended his hand then. Not to Jason. To Evelyn. Simple. Elegant. The room collectively stopped pretending not to watch. Jason stared at the gesture like it violated natural law. Vanessa whispered, "What is happening?" No one answered. Alexander looked directly at Evelyn. "Shall we?" Jason stepped forward instinctively. Wait. The word escaped him before he could disguise it. Too familiar. Too desperate. Evelyn did not move immediately. She let the silence exist. Let Jason feel it. Let the room witness it. Jason looked from Alexander to Evelyn, trying to solve a puzzle he had not known existed. Evelyn, he said, voice lower now, stripped of performance. Who exactly are you to him? Evelyn met his eyes. Calm. Composed. Entirely beyond his assumptions. And Alexander answered before she could. Alexander did not hesitate. She is my wife. No flourish. No dramatic pause. Just 4 words delivered with the kind of certainty that made explanation unnecessary. The silence that followed felt almost physical. Jason stared at him as though language itself had failed. Vanessa's hand slipped from Jason's arm. Somewhere behind them, someone quietly set down a champagne glass. Evelyn did not look at the crowd. She looked at Jason. Not with triumph. Not with anger. Just clarity. It was astonishing how unfamiliar his face looked without confidence. Your wife. Jason repeated, each word slower than the last, like saying them differently might change reality. Alexander's expression remained composed. Yes. Jason laughed once. A brittle sound. I am sorry. I think there has to be some misunderstanding. There is not, Alexander said. Jason looked at Evelyn. You are married? Yes. Since when? The question came too quickly, too personally, as if he still believed himself entitled to timeline access. Evelyn answered evenly. Long enough. Vanessa finally found her voice. Jason, did you know about this? He did not answer because he could not. The room had become a study in social repositioning. The same executives who had laughed earlier were now suddenly very interested in neutrality. No one wanted to be visibly attached to the wrong version of events. Jason tried to recover with logic. This is unexpected, he said, forcing professional calm back into his tone. Had I known, obviously tonight would have been approached differently. Evelyn almost admired the speed of the rewrite. Almost. Would it? She asked. Jason ignored the question. Mr. Morgan, if there has been any discomfort, I assure you that was never the intention. Alexander regarded him for a moment. That is inconsistent with what I observed. The sentence landed with surgical precision. Jason swallowed. Context matters. It often does. Then perhaps this looks worse than it was. Evelyn let out the faintest breath that might have become a laugh in another life. Vanessa looked trapped between embarrassment and calculation. Jason was only joking, she offered weakly. No one moved to support her. Alexander glanced toward Evelyn. Did it feel like a joke? The question was for her. Not rhetorical. Genuine. Jason closed his eyes briefly. Come on. Evelyn held Alexander's gaze. No, one word. Calm. Final. Alexander nodded once. That tiny acknowledgement somehow carried more loyalty than grand declarations ever could. Jason noticed. Of course he did. Men like Jason always noticed where loyalty shifted. Evelyn, he said, dropping the executive tone entirely. Why would you not tell me? The question was so deeply revealing, she almost pitied him. Why would I? Because this is not exactly minor information. To whom? Jason stared. You cannot be serious. I am perfectly serious. Vanessa looked at Evelyn as if reassessing every moment from the evening. You came here knowing this would happen? Evelyn turned to her. I came because I was invited. That feels intentionally misleading. Interesting observation from someone who laughed during introductions. Vanessa flushed. Jason stepped closer, voice lower now. This is vindictive. That word changed something in Evelyn. Not visibly. Internally. Because even now, even here, he needed her reaction to orbit him. No, she said quietly. Vindictive would have required planning. Jason shook his head. Then what is this? Evelyn looked around the ballroom. The chandeliers. The polished marble. The audience that had shifted allegiance without apology. Consequences, she said. Silence again. Jason's jaw tightened. That is unfair. Alexander's expression cooled by a single degree. You invited your former spouse to a professional event and publicly framed her as a symbol of your personal success. Jason opened his mouth. Alexander continued. In front of colleagues. Another beat. In front of leadership. Another. While she remained significantly more composed than you. A faint murmur moved through nearby guests. Jason looked humiliated in a way no direct insult could have achieved. Because everything Alexander said was true. Vanessa took a half step backward, distancing herself without fully realizing it. Jason noticed that too. I built my career on merit, Jason said, defensive now. No one is disputing your employment history, Alexander replied. The wording was devastating. Evelyn looked down briefly, not to hide emotion, but to steady herself against the surreal symmetry of it all. Years ago, Jason had taught her what it felt like to be quietly dismissed in rooms where status mattered. Tonight, status had spoken in her defense without her asking. Jason exhaled sharply. I think this entire thing is being exaggerated beyond reason. Do you? Alexander asked. Jason looked toward the executives nearby, searching for support. None arrived. One man suddenly checked his phone with theatrical urgency. Another woman adjusted her bracelet with astonishing concentration. Social courage, Evelyn thought, remained a scarce resource. I was celebrating a promotion, Jason said. And instead, Alexander replied, you demonstrated judgment. Jason went still. Vanessa whispered, Jason, but he was no longer listening. He looked only at Evelyn now. Really looked. As though trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the one standing in front of him. You changed, he said quietly. Evelyn considered that. Yes. Into this. Into someone who no longer needs your approval. That was the sentence that truly broke whatever remained of his balance. Not because it was cruel. Because it was true. Alexander extended his arm again, this time with no interruption. Evelyn accepted it. Simple. Natural. The gesture said everything Jason had failed to understand for years. Respect was not loud. It was consistent. As they turned, Jason spoke one last time. Evelyn. She paused, but did not face him immediately. I would have treated this differently if I knew. She turned then. Calm. Unshaken. That, she said, is exactly the point. Some people mistake silence for weakness because they have only ever understood power when it was loud. Evelyn felt Jason's eyes on her as Alexander's arm remained steady beside her, offered without urgency, without performance. She accepted it because refusing would have implied uncertainty she did not feel. Around them, conversations restarted in fragmented whispers, the kind that traveled quickly and changed shape with every retelling. Vanessa stepped closer to Jason, but not quite touching him now, as if proximity suddenly carried risk. Jason looked like a man trying to calculate whether dignity could still be salvaged through strategy. Evelyn had seen that expression in conference rooms, in legal meetings, in marriage. It always appeared when Jason realized charm alone would not fix the situation. Mr. Morgan, Jason said, His voice measured again, rebuilt from corporate instinct. If there has been some misunderstanding, I would appreciate the opportunity to clarify privately. Alexander turned slightly, not enough to disengage from Evelyn. Privately. Jason nodded. This is obviously becoming a spectacle. You created a public interaction, Alexander said evenly. Public outcomes occasionally follow. A quiet sound escaped someone nearby that might have been a disguised cough or a failed laugh. Jason heard it. His jaw shifted. That is not entirely fair. Fairness appears to be a recent concern. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, perhaps wishing the chandelier would collapse metaphorically if not structurally. Jason pressed forward anyway. I have worked extremely hard for this company. No one disputed your work ethic. Then I would hope one awkward social moment does not define professional standing. Alexander studied him for a second that felt longer. That depends whether it was awkward or revealing. The sentence moved through the room like cold air. Evelyn remained still. Not because she needed protection. Because Alexander understood something Jason never had. Support did not require taking over someone's story. It required standing beside them while truth became visible. Jason looked at Evelyn instead. You are enjoying this. It was accusation disguised as insight. Evelyn answered honestly. No, that seemed to unsettle him more than if she had smiled. Then what is this expression? Relief. Jason blinked. Relief? Yes. She looked at him steadily. Because for the first time, your behavior is inconvenient to someone other than me. That landed. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. Jason, maybe we should just go talk to someone else. He ignored her. You could have told me. You keep returning to that, Evelyn said. Because it matters. To you. To basic reality. No, she said softly. To your assumptions. Jason exhaled sharply through his nose. So this was some elaborate test? You invited your former wife to a corporate gala to frame her as evidence of your success, Alexander said. And you believe you were the one being tested. Jason's mouth opened, then closed. Evelyn almost recognized the feeling crossing his face. It looked like the early stages of self-awareness. But only briefly. Ambitious people often recover too quickly from reflection. I made a mistake, he said finally, choosing the smallest admission possible. Then corrected, Alexander replied. I am trying. No, Evelyn said. Jason turned. What? You are managing optics. Silence. That is different. Vanessa's expression hardened slightly, the first sign that embarrassment was becoming resentment. This is unbelievable, she muttered. He said he was sorry. Evelyn looked at her. Did he? Vanessa hesitated. Jason stepped in. Fine. I am sorry. The words arrived with all the emotional sincerity of a legal disclaimer. Evelyn said nothing. Jason ran a hand across his jaw, the movement more agitated than polished now. What exactly do you want me to say? That question. Again. As though women existed to provide scripts for accountability. Evelyn almost answered, then chose not to. Alexander did instead. Nothing performative. Jason laughed once, low and humorless. Easy for you to say. That was the mistake. The room felt it immediately. Vanessa did too. Jason, she whispered, alarmed. But he was unraveling now in elegant increments. With all due respect, you are entering a personal matter with incomplete information. Alexander's expression did not change. Then completed. Jason hesitated. He had nowhere safe to go with the truth. Relationships are complicated. Some are, Evelyn said. Humiliation is less nuanced. Jason turned toward her sharply. You always make things moral. Only when they are. A senior executive near the stage quietly walked away, clearly deciding this had exceeded acceptable networking entertainment. Others remained. Human beings have always loved watching status rearrange itself. Vanessa finally spoke the question circling the room. Why keep your marriage secret? Her tone carried suspicion, but also something else. Curiosity. Evelyn answered simply. Privacy. Convenient. For whom? Vanessa had no response. Alexander glanced toward Evelyn. You do not owe explanations. I know. The words were small. Intimate in a way no one else would fully understand. Jason understood enough. His face tightened. How long? He asked. Does that matter? Yes. Why? Because I am asking. There it was. The old reflex. Access mistaken for entitlement. Evelyn almost felt nostalgic for how transparent he had become. Long enough to learn the difference between attention and respect, she said. Jason looked away first. That alone would have shocked the earlier version of him. Vanessa folded her arms. So what now? It sounded harsher than intended. Not cruel, just destabilized. Alexander answered with quiet certainty. Now the evening continues. Such a simple sentence. Yet Jason heard what everyone else did. Life would proceed. The company would survive. The chandeliers would remain lit. The room would remember. And his carefully staged triumph would never be remembered the way he intended. Jason lowered his voice, almost to himself. This cannot be how this ends. Evelyn heard him. Strange. Years ago, she might have agreed. She used to believe endings required confrontation, explanations, emotional symmetry. Now she understood something cleaner. Some endings simply required clarity. Alexander's hand rested lightly against hers. Steady. Present. Not possessive. Just certain. Jason looked at that gesture with the unmistakable expression of a man finally understanding what he had failed to value. But recognition and deserving are not the same thing. And for the first time all night, Evelyn saw not the ambitious man who left her, not the polished executive performing success, but someone profoundly small inside the architecture of his own ego. He took a breath like he wanted to say something important, something redemptive, something that might rearrange the emotional arithmetic of the room. Evelyn already knew it would be too late. The strange thing about closure is that it rarely arrives as a conversation. More often, it arrives as a moment when you realize you no longer need one. Jason opened his mouth like he had finally found the right words. Evelyn had seen that expression before too. The belief that language, properly arranged, could undo consequences. Evelyn, he said, quieter now, stripped of performance, I made mistakes. Vanessa looked at him sharply, as though this version of honesty had not been approved. That is true, Evelyn said. Jason exhaled. I was ambitious. Also true. I handled things badly. Yes. He frowned. You do not have to sound so calm about it. She almost smiled. That is interesting. Why? Because when I was emotional, you called me irrational. Now I am calm, and that bothers you too. A few people nearby shifted awkwardly. Jason rubbed a hand across his face, suddenly looking older than he had an hour earlier. I am trying here. To do what? She asked. Fix this. Evelyn looked around the ballroom. The elegant lighting. The polished surfaces. The guests pretending discretion while memorizing every second. This is not yours to fix. Jason's voice dropped. I never thought I would see you like this. Like what? Untouchable. The word hung there longer than either of them expected. Evelyn considered answering with something sharp. Instead, she chose honesty. I am not untouchable. I am simply no longer reachable in the same places. That seemed to hit him harder than accusation. Vanessa stepped in at last, brittle politeness barely masking embarrassment. I think everyone has said enough. Alexander glanced at her, then at Jason. That would have been a useful instinct earlier. Vanessa looked away immediately. Jason laughed once, exhausted now. I suppose I deserve that. Alexander said nothing. Some silences are more accurate than agreement. Jason looked at Evelyn one final time. Really looked, without the old arrogance, without performance, without the comforting illusion that he understood her. Were you ever going to tell me? He asked. Evelyn thought about the woman she used to be. The one who explained herself carefully. The one who believed understanding could heal disrespect. No, she said. Why? Because my life stopped being a report you were entitled to read. Jason lowered his eyes. That was the first genuine humility she had seen from him in years. Perhaps ever. But timing matters. Character revealed late is still revealed late. Alexander's hand remained steady against hers. Not urgent. Not claiming. Just present. Jason noticed. He really loves you. The question surprised everyone, perhaps even him. Evelyn answered without hesitation. Yes. And you love him? She looked at Alexander. The calm certainty in his posture. The quiet respect in every interaction. The way he never demanded performance from her pain. Yes. Jason nodded once, slowly, like accepting terms he had no power to negotiate. Then I guess that is that. It was the closest thing to grace he had managed all evening. Evelyn could have said many things. She could have reminded him of the apartment in Queens. The sold bracelet. The ignored calls. The courier envelope. The years she rebuilt herself in silence. But revenge, she had learned, often tempts people into becoming archivists of their own suffering. She no longer wanted that job, so she said nothing. Alexander guided her gently toward the ballroom exit. No dramatic announcement. No theatrical triumph. Just movement. Quiet and irreversible. Behind them, conversation slowly resumed in fractured whispers. Careers would continue. Gossip would mutate. Jason would survive this. Vanessa probably would too. Life is inconveniently resilient that way. At the elevator, Evelyn glanced once over her shoulder. Jason still stood near the center of the room, no longer the hero of his own event, just another man in an expensive suit learning that status cannot revise history. For one brief second, their eyes met across the distance. She expected anger, regret, something dramatic. Instead, she saw something simpler. Recognition, not of who Alexander was, of who she had become. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Inside, mirrored walls reflected a version of Evelyn that would have been unrecognizable to her younger self. Not because of the gown, not because of the company, because of the piece. Alexander stepped in beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked. Such a small question, yet it contained more care than entire years of her previous marriage. Evelyn let out a breath she had apparently been holding for a decade. "Yes." Alexander studied her for a moment. "Do you regret coming?" She thought about that honestly. The invitation, the cruelty, the spectacle, the reversal. Then she shook her head. "No, why?" The elevator doors began to close. Evelyn looked at her reflection one last time. "Because some people need to witness that they did not destroy you." Alexander's expression softened, almost into a smile. "That sounds less like revenge." Evelyn leaned lightly against his shoulder as Manhattan glowed below them in fractured gold. "Good," she said, "because it was never about getting him back." The doors closed completely, sealing the ballroom and everything it represented on the other side. Her old life had once ended with paperwork and silence. This one did not end at all. It simply continued. Stronger, quieter, entirely her own.